Hello everyone, are you there? Are you with me? It's a bit exciting for me to do the class like this, but I think we have to get used to this until the epidemic ends. So the subject today is language testing and assessment. Yeah, so first I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the subject. Before I say anything, which of the following questions can you answer? Why testing? Why is so much importance is placed on testing? You know, when someone thinks that our education needs some reform, people think at once about testing, and they have done some reforms in testing. So why so? Can you answer this question? How important is testing? And the second question is types of tests and testing. If you can answer the question about the importance of testing already, then we move on to the question of the different types of tests and testings. And then, being teachers, how often do you use tests? Do you use tests prepared by others, or do you develop your own tests? And if you develop your own test, or do you know how to do it, how to develop good tests? Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Tuấn asked me to avoid the words good or bad, but here at least we have to say, we have to distinguish good and bad tests. So even if you don't develop your own test, do you know how to choose a good test from, or to distinguish good tests from bad ones? That's the next question. Normally, when we talk about tests, we talk about the features of reliability and validity. So what are they? What exactly are these two concepts? And how do you measure the reliability and reliability and validity of a test? And what are other characteristics of tests? So that's the third question for you. And sometimes we hear about score distribution or the bell curve. So what exactly are they? Have you got any idea? Normally after examination, especially national examination, newspapers often publish the curves or the score distribution of the test. So what exactly do they mean? The next question is, number 5 is stages in test development. So I repeat myself because it's also about the question 3, stages in test development. So what steps do you have to follow in order to have to write or to develop a good test to use in your class? And then the next question comes. The next question is, what are common test techniques? Because when you develop or you build a test, you can use different techniques. So what are they? Are you familiar with some of them? Sure, you are. Question 7 is about testing and assessment. Being teachers, we have to be familiar with different forms of assessment. So, can you answer this question? The difference or differences between testing and assessment, and what forms, alternative forms, or informal forms of assessment do you often use in class? the last question is different forms of classroom assessment, non-traditional or informal or alternative assessment. So, which or how many of the questions can you answer? I hope that you can answer most of the questions. Can you? Are you with me? Oh, I don't see any answer yet. Okay, so it's a bit difficult to do the class this way because I can't hear your answer at once. Anyway, so these are questions for you to brainstorm on the subject, because those are the content of the course that we will be going over. So, the objectives of our course, language testing and assessment, consists of the following. Of course, first we talk about the knowledge. So after the course, you can understand the importance and significance of language testing and assessment, and you understand different kinds of tests and testing, and the desirable qualities of tests such as validity, reliability, and you will know the beneficial and watchback, and how to improve, how to promote or enhance the beneficial watchback of tests. And then the next is about stages of test development. So after learning this course, you will understand the different stages involved in developing a test. The relationship between teaching and testing, teaching and learning and testing, and what should be done in order to enhance the beneficial impact of testing on teaching and learning. And of course, you will understand some basic, I just say basic test statistics, like mean, mode, or score distribution, or something like that, so that when people in the society are discussing these features or these statistics, you know at once what they are, and you can even explain to others what they really mean. And of course, you will learn about some alternative forms, or maybe they are not the new things that you will learn, but we will share and we will exchange the new forms of alternative assessment. So these are about the knowledge outcomes. And about the competence or skills, I hope that after finishing the course, you will be able to select tests of different types appropriate for your purpose of testing. And the second skill is to adapt tests of different types for your own testing purposes. Also, what I consider important most is that you will be able to design your own test, design your own good tests that are valid and that are reliable, that can provide you with accurate information about your students' ability and about the effectiveness of your teaching and your students' learning. And of course, besides the formal test, we will have to think about applying different forms of alternative classroom assessment. And I hope that you will share among you the different forms, different techniques for informal classroom assessment, so that you can improve your teaching and your students' learning through using these forms of alternative assessment. You agree with me? Okay, and that's about the skill outcomes. And normally when we talk about a course, we will expect the learners will have some changes in the attitudes or so after this course you are expected to have a more positive attitudes to testing and assessment. I say more because I'm sure that most of you have a positive already, but now more positive attitudes. You are not afraid of designing tests. You are not afraid of preparing tests for your students, and also you are expected to be more confident in participating in discussion about testing and assessment, especially when someone out there in the society criticizes some tests, and you know whether they are correct or not, and you can participate in the discussion, and you can give your own opinions about different tests based on what you know and based on some statistics that you got already. And the most important thing, list is most important. The last is the most important, is that you will be confident in testing and assessing your students' language abilities in your process of teaching. So these are course objectives. Okay? Is everything clear? You want to ask me any question? Or you can, just save some questions for later, and we will move on with the content. Of course, the content must match with the objectives. We have 9 lessons or 9 classes, right? And the content is divided into 9 different sessions. So here, you can have a look at this. I have sent you the syllabus already, and you will got the textbook already, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, shall we move on to the next? That is learning materials. I've sent you the soft copy of the Hills Testing for Language Teachers. And the reason I want to use this textbook as a core textbook is that most of you are teachers, or almost all of you are teachers. So I want you to get some most practical knowledge and skills from this course. Being teachers, you will be able to do the testing performance or the testing jobs in your job better. And we have 2 required references, which are Language Testing in Practice by Bachman, and another by Brown, Language Assessment Principles and Classroom Practices, also about classroom practices. So these are the course book and the required references. You will be required to do a lot of reading, and after each reading, there will be some exercises or some practice for you to do to just apply the knowledge you get from the reading to analyze the real situation, to solve some real problems in your own teaching. About course policies and assessment, the normal routine is that about 10% is dedicated for attendance and participation. If we have to go on meeting this way, we have a virtual classes like this, it's a bit difficult for me to assess your participation. Anyway, I will look at your questions, your answers, or your opinions later. If we can't interact right now, I will have a chance to look at your answers or opinions later, maybe by email, or maybe you just type your opinion right now, and I will look at them later, and I will know whether you are interested in this subject, or whether you are not there when I ask questions. Okay, and 30% is for continuous assessment, which includes home reading, some mini tests, and oral presentation, some practice after reading, as I mentioned before. And the most important part is the final assignment. Many of you often ask me about final assignment right at the very beginning of the lesson, of the course, so I will tell you now. For the final assignment, you will have to write a test, of course, but it's not only a test. In order to have a good test, you should know the test problem. So you have to describe test problems or something like a rationale for the test. And then you will have to prepare a test specification. Later, when we talk about developing stages in test development, we will look at how to write test specification. And after you have a test specification, of course, you will have to think about how to score the test, like preparing the answer key, or you will have to write a scoring scale for writing and speaking. And you will have to think about scoring procedures already even before you develop the test. You actually write the test. And then, of course, the final product is the test itself. Normally, the test is about it is a 45-minute test, and you will pick different skills or topics for the test, like vocabulary and grammar, or even pronunciation and the 4 skills. So this is about how the course will be assessed. Okay, if you have any questions about this, I don't know whether you can type it here or you can ask later. Maybe we will leave it for later, okay? Yeah. Later, okay? Yes. So, that's all about the introduction to the course. The objective, the content, how the course will be assessed, and what you are expected to do during the course. I'm still wondering how I will check your participation, like in class discussion, or because I have some mini tests for you to do. So maybe the technicians will help me later to solve the problem, because I believe every problem has a solution. Okay, so that's about the introduction. Let's move on to the first part of the course today. That's about teaching and testing. You know the relationship between teaching and testing? Normally we say testing and teaching have very close relationship. So how do they influence each other? And of course, when I say teaching here, I also mean learning, teaching, learning, and testing. So in this part, I will talk about the needs for test and some very brief information about backwash and some problems with tests like inaccuracy. Sometimes we have an inaccurate test. And then we will touch on testing and assessment and what to be done. Why do we need tests? If we are in a class now, I will hide away the slide and ask you to answer the question, but because we are here meeting through online, so the answer is provided here already. So we use tests to provide, to get information about people's language ability, of course, for language abilities. And we can use the information for different purposes, like job recruiting or college or university admitting or something like that. And we also use tests to measure learners' learning achievements and progress. And sometimes we use tests to make meaningful comparisons between different candidates or different test takers or different groups of test takers. So that's why we need for tests. But why, when we talk about education reform, we think about tests? Of course, because there's a very close relationship between teaching and testing. How close? How close? So people often say testing, there are three roles of testing. Testing of teaching, testing for teaching, and testing as teaching. How do you understand these three phrases? Yeah, maybe you will give me the answer later. But now I just want to talk about washback. This is about the effect of teaching. Of testing on teaching and learning. So the washback can be beneficial or can be harmful. When can the washback be beneficial? And how? How can washback be beneficial? When does testing have a good effect or beneficial effect on teaching and learning? So if the test is accurate, if it provides accurate information about the students or about the candidates' language abilities, we know at once that the course is running smoothly, or there are problems that there are some changes that have to be made in order to get better results of the teaching and learning. So in that way, we can say that testing can cause changes in the syllabus or the choice of textbook or teaching and learning method. And of course, testing can be supporting of teaching, of good teaching. Yeah, once again, I have to use the word good. Good teaching means good method, good content, appropriate method, appropriate content. So good results. And for, say, bad teaching, testing can provide a corrective influence, because when you get the results of a test, you know at once what the students are weak at, what the students haven't learned, what the students don't understand, what students your students can't do, so that you can correct your own teaching by using some more effective methods or some more effective techniques, or you can provide more content, more practice for your students. And you know, washback can also be harmful. When? How? Washback of testing can be harmful, and we have experienced some harmful washback or effects or influence of testing on teaching. I think being teachers, you know already. So testing can dominate teaching and learning activities. Like when the students have to do a test which consists of only multiple choice questions, true, false, gap filling, etc. They don't want to learn some productive skills anymore. What they do is to practice doing the test all the time, so that at the end of the course they can get good marks, because they are good at doing the multiple choice items. They can do well at true false tests, for example. So that's harmful washback of testing on teaching. And if the test you use are not consistent with the learning objectives, so the students and even teachers may be distracted from the learning objectives, because the focus is on test, how to get good marks, how to get good results at test, and objectives of learning, objectives of the course will be forgotten or neglected, ignored. Okay, so these are some examples of beneficial and harmful washback of testing. Testing or tests have a harmful washback when they are inaccurate. Inaccurate tests provide inaccurate information about students' ability. You don't have a full picture of the students' ability, and sometimes good students may get bad marks, or bad students or weak students may get better marks, better scores, better results of the test, because the tests are inaccurate. Why? What are the sources of inaccuracy of the information tests provides? The first reason is that the test content and test techniques does not measure what is intended to be measured. So we say the test is invalid. For example, you want to measure the student's writing ability or speaking ability, and you use a lot of multiple choice, true, false. Then, of course, you can't have a full picture of the student's writing ability or speaking ability. Or sometimes, for the economical or time reason, we use indirect testing for pronunciation. Instead of asking the students to pronounce words or to speak so that you can assess their pronunciation, you ask them to do some multiple choice questions, MCQ, like the odd one out, or which parts or which underlined part of the words in the following list is pronounced differently, something like that. So in that way, you can't assess correctly, or you can't have a correct or accurate information about your students' pronunciation skills or pronunciation ability. And the second source of inaccuracy of test is that there's lack reliability. So a test does not measure consistently the skills or the ability of the learners, because there's some interaction between the test taker and test feature, or because of the scoring. Scoring sometimes inaccurate because a lot of subjectivity or is involved, or because of some errors, or because the answer keys are not clear enough. So there are more than one acceptable answer to the question. So then we say there's some reliability degree in scoring of the test answers. Then we have inaccurate information about students' ability. So what should we do? You know, the testing is important because it has a lot of influence, both harmful and beneficial influence on this teaching and learning. And yes, tests sometimes are inaccurate, which provide inaccurate information about students' learning, students' ability. So what should we do in order to have a good test and to have a to avoid harmful watchback and to promote beneficial watchback of the students of the tests that we use to assess students' ability? So a test should consistently and accurately measure precisely the abilities to be tested. Yeah. So here we have to remember some words like consistently, and accurately and precisely. The ability to be tested. Ability in like skills or abilities in the knowledge, using the knowledge of the language, using vocabulary, using pronunciation, grammatical structures, etc. So we use the general word abilities to talk about students' knowledge and skills and competence in using the language. So what we want to test should be tested. This is easier said than done, and we will go deep into this issue later in the next lessons. The next thing that a test should is that a test should have a beneficial watchback on teaching and learning, and of course we have to think about some economical and reasons like time and money. A good test shouldn't be too time consuming and shouldn't cost a lot of money. Yeah, so these are the problems that will be solved later in our next lessons, in the lessons to come. And being teachers, what can you do? What can you do? Yes, so you will learn to write better tests. What else? You can put pressure on professional test writers so that they can improve the test. They can make the test more reliable, more valid for use. And being teachers. And after you have all the knowledge and skills in language testing and assessment, you will be able to enlighten others involved in testing processes. You will teach your colleagues, or you will teach other teachers how to develop, how to choose good tests for use. So that's what this course is expected to result in. You being able to do all these three things. Now, the next subtopic of this lesson is testing and assessment. Testing and assessment. Do they mean the same? No, of course not. We know that testing is just one form of assessment. Assessment is an umbrella term, and testing is just one form of assessment. And when we talk about assessment, we talk about formative, or continuous or formative, to check on students' progress. We can use different forms of assessment, classroom assessment, like quizzes or observation or portfolios, or I think that being teachers, you are very creative and you have more different forms of formative assessment to check on your students' progress. And also here the phrase testing as learning can be applied. So you can use some tests, and your students can also learn through doing the test. So it's about assessment. And what about test? Test is often summative. We use a test to measure students' achievement, or to measure the students, a group's of students' achievement or individuals' achievement. And we often use formal tests, end of term or end of school year tests. So that's a basic difference between testing and assessment. That's the end of this session, and I have some practice for you to do. In fact, this is maybe you will have to choose some test you are familiar with, and then you analyze the tests. The test can be an international one, or it can be a local one, or it can be written by you yourself sometime before, or some other teachers in your school. Or you can use, look at some tests. English tests are used at the national examination for high school levels. And just analyze just one test. I think one test is enough, not some, but one test, and analyze the washback effects of the test, and decide whether the effect, the influence is harmful or beneficial, and why you think they are beneficial, and why you think they are harmful. Explain. Of course, this is an analysis of a test, so you have to explain very carefully why you think so. And then consider the test again, and this time think about the level of accuracy of information that the test can provide. Do you think the test can provide accurate information about the student's ability? And of course, you have to give reasons for your answer. Okay. So I can give you time to do the practice now. You will do it later, and you will submit your answers to me later. Okay? So I think now we should have a short break for this. Do you agree? Em ơi. Hello? Are you with me? Are you with me now? Shall we have a short break? Nghỉ một tí nhé. We have a short break so that the students can note down the practice for them to do later and submit the answer later. Hello, welcome back. We will do the last part of today's lesson. For the practice that I mentioned before previously, you will do at home, and then I will ask the monitors of each of the monitors of the group to collect all your answers and make something like a folder and send them to me later. Now we move on to the next topic of today's lesson, which is kinds of test and testing. What are kinds of tests that you've known already? And how about different types of testing? So in today's lesson, we will look at all the most important or the most prominent kinds of tests and kinds of testing. When we talk about kinds of tests, we know that the tests are classified according to their purposes, like a proficiency test, achievement test, diagnostic or placement test. And about kinds of testing, we look at the approaches to test construction, like direct versus indirect testing, the discrete point versus integrative testing, or non-referenced and criterion referenced, objective versus subjective testing, and also we look at computer adaptive testing. First type of test is proficiency test. As the name suggests, you know that a proficiency test is used to assess or to measure the proficiency in language or language proficiency of the candidates. Or in other words, we say to measure the ability in language. And we know that the kind of ability that we measure by means of a proficiency test doesn't depend on any previous or prior course or courses that the candidate has taken. We don't look at any previous courses, and we don't look at the prior training of the candidates. We just look at a set of ability criteria for the ability, and we assess the learners or the candidates against that set of criteria. So, because the purpose is just to assess or to measure the abilities of the candidates, the content of the test is not based on any content or objectives of any course at all, but the content is based on the sufficient command of English for a particular purpose, or for job recruit or university admission, etc. Or the content is based on the standard of specified abilities, which is for more general proficiency. And what is the backwash of this type of test? This type of test, or this kind of test, can have influence or great influence on the methods and the content of language courses. And we know that the influence can be both harmful and beneficial. For example, TOEFL is a kind of proficiency test. IELTS is also a kind of proficiency test. So now, many courses, language courses, just take the skills and content that are tested in the IELTS or TOEFL to teach to the students in the course. The second kind of test is achievement test. The name can tell you the purpose of the test. It is used to measure the achievement of the teaching and learning in a course, to establish how successful individual or group of students a course have been achieving its objectives. So the content is directly related to the content of the course, or directly related to the objectives of the course. For achievement tests, we have two types of achievement tests: the final achievement test and the progress achievement tests. And final, of course, we use it at the end of the course to measure the achievement of the whole course, the achievement, the results of learning and teaching of the whole course. And for progress achievement tests, we just test students' progress or learning results after a part of a course or after a period in a course, after some units in a course or some lessons. For final achievement test, there are two approaches to choose, to develop, to construct the test. First, we can use the syllabus as a basis for selecting the content of the test. Or we can use the objective as a basis for developing the test. What's the difference between these two? If it is easier for test developers to just base themselves on the content of the course, what the students have learned in the course will be represented in a test. But sometimes there are inaccuracies in the information about the student's ability, because there may be some errors in the syllabus itself. Maybe the content selected to teach in the course is not appropriate, or maybe some contents, or maybe some teaching materials are not appropriate. So if you want to measure the achievement of a course, it is more accurate if you base the test on the objectives of the course to find out whether all the objectives of the course have been achieved or not. And then it will take more time and it's more difficult because you have to, from the objectives, you have to think about the content yourself. You have to choose the content yourself, not from the syllabus, but the content that you think can match with the objectives of the course. So these are the two approaches to choose the content for an achievement, especially the final achievement test. And of course, the backwash of achievement test is also great, but it's greater for progress achievement test because after a few units or a few lessons, you give a test and you know whether you are going or you are doing appropriately or you are doing the right things. Your teaching methods, your teaching materials are appropriate or not, and you can make some adjustment. But for final achievement test, so the influence may be on the next course or the later part of the, the next course or the, oh yes, so because it's at the end of the course, the influence is on the next course only. So that's about achievement test, and the next type is Dynastic Test. Dynastic Test, of course, as the name suggests, is used to identify learners' strengths and weaknesses and to create learners' profile of language ability and to ascertain that language learning is still what learning still needs to take place. So these are the purposes of a diagnostic test. And the content, sometimes we can use a proficiency test to as a diagnostic test for the purpose of identifying students' strengths and weaknesses. And if it is before a course, we can use the objectives or the content of the course to construct the test and see how much of the objectives or how much of the content the students have known already, and we can make some diagnosis and make some adjustment or in teaching the content of the course so that we can teach the course successfully to the student. And backwash, so because diagnostic test, the results of diagnostic test tell us about the students' strengths and weaknesses, the backwash is also, the influence is also clear, obvious on the teaching method or on the teaching content. And in many cases, the learners use the results for self-instruction, or the teachers use the results for individualizing the instruction. For placement test, you know already, we use the placement test to provide information that helps to place the candidates or students at the stage or in the part of the program most appropriate to them. And sometimes we can use the results to assign students to classes of different levels. The same groups of students may be classified according to their levels of ability, and we have A1 class, A2 class, something like that, to assign them to different classes. The content of this type of test is usually choose for particular situations based on the program's objectives and content. And also, the content of this test is based on the key features of different levels of the program. Like A1 should have these features of proficiency, and A2 should have these features of proficiency. So we use these features as basis for developing or constructing the test. So these are the different types of testing. Different types of tests. Now we move on to different types of testing. As we mentioned before, first we have direct versus indirect testing. I think the concept is quite easy to understand because the names tell us themselves, direct and indirect. So, what is direct testing? Direct testing requires candidates to perform precisely the skill to be measured. For example, if you want to assess a student's writing ability, you ask them to write a paragraph, a composition, an essay, etc. And then you assess their ability of writing through this piece, through the composition, or paragraph, or essay. Or if you want to assess a student's speaking ability, you ask them to speak, of course. You conduct a speaking test with interview, discussion, or different types of speaking you can ask them to do. For this, it is easier to measure the productive skill like speaking and writing, because if you want to assess writing, ask them to write, and you look at the piece of writing and you assess the ability. But for the receptive skills, such as listening and reading, it's more difficult. Do you know why? Why is it not so easy to directly assess a student's listening and reading abilities? Because if you want to assess a student's reading ability, for example, you ask them to read, of course, to read a passage, read a text, even read a book, if you want to, of course. But then how do you assess? How do you know whether the students have understood the text or the passage? You have to use some other means to check the student's ability to understand, like you have to ask them to write down the answer, short answer, for example. You have to ask them to do some exercises. So through doing the exercises or through writing down the answers, the ability of the reading may be not reflected in the answer, because the ability to write may interfere with the ability to understand the text. Similarly, with listening, if you want to check the student's ability to listen, or listening skills of the students, you ask them to listen to a text, a dialogue, or conversation, or etc. And then you will have to ask them to do some exercise. And when doing the exercise, the students have to read or to write. So the ability of writing and reading may interfere, may influence the results of the ability to listen. So we have to be very careful about this. Otherwise, the results of these types of tests, reading tests and listening tests, are not reliable enough. One advantage of direct testing is that it's relatively straightforward to elicit behavior from the candidates for judgment. It's easy to write a writing test. Just a few sentences, like write a composition about the advantages and disadvantages of online courses, for example. So it's quite easy to prepare a test like that. And the second advantage of direct testing is that it can provide helpful watchback effects. Because if you want the students to improve their writing or speaking, or even reading and listening abilities, and you test them by asking them to do these things, they will learn to write, they will learn to speak, they will learn to read or listen. But if you just use some kind of indirect testing, like multiple choice or jumbo text, to check the students' ability to read or to write, then the students may end up in doing all these indirect items, indirect tests, and they will never practice writing or speaking. However, there are some disadvantages of direct testing. The first one is that we can have only a small number of tasks. Instead of asking the students just to choose the right answer, A, B, C, or D, you ask them to write a composition, an essay. So the number of tasks is limited, of course. And the second disadvantage of direct testing is that the scoring may not be reliable enough, because subjectivity will be involved in scoring composition or in scoring students' speaking speeches. So maybe the scoring is not very reliable. And the second, it's also time consuming. So these are the two disadvantages of direct testing. And how about indirect testing? Indirect testing is used to measure the ability underlying the skills to be tested. For example, if you want to test a student's writing ability, you ask them to do a kind of putting or reordering the sentences in a text. Or you ask them to provide, to choose the appropriate preposition or appropriate cohesive devices for the piece of writing. Or you ask them to rewrite sentences. Instead of rewriting sentences, you ask them to choose from the 4 options the sentence that has the closest meaning to the original one. Yeah. And then you say that it is a test for writing. But in fact, it's hard to say that the ability of writing is tested in this way. Of course, indirect testing has some advantages. The first one is that with this type of testing, you can use many tasks. The number of tasks can be much greater than direct testing, like multiple choice, true, false, rearranging or reordering. So you can use many items instead of one, like in direct testing. And the results, because you can have a large representative samples of language ability, the results can be generalizable, more generalizable than the result of direct testing. And what about the disadvantages? I mentioned previously, there's the relationship between performance of tasks and performance of the skills to be tested may be loose. You can't be sure that the fact that the students can rearrange the sentences in a text will reflect their ability to write a good text. So the relationship between the tasks that the students have to do and the skills that you want to test may be loose and is not confirmed. So this is a disadvantage of this type of testing. In order to improve the accuracy or validity of testing, we use more direct testing than indirect testing. But for the purposes of saving time and money, we can use more indirect testing. For larger scale test or examination, we use more indirect testing. Now, the next type of testing we want to discuss here is discrete point versus integrative. Discrete point, so testing one element at a time, and we use it for a grammar or vocabulary test. And this is more indirect. And what about integrative? Integrative, the name suggests, we can use one task, but that requires the candidates to combine many language elements, like a composition. You ask them to write an essay. It is only one task, but in order to write an essay, the students will have to demonstrate their writing skills, different sub-skills of writing, ability to use correctly vocabulary, and demonstrate their grammatical knowledge too. So this is an integrative test. Or you ask the students to listen and make notes. So it also involves different elements than just listening, or to do a closed passage. So integrative testing is more direct than discrete point testing. And normally we often combine the two approaches, discrete point and integrative testing, to have a better or more accurate results of the student's ability. And then we have non-referenced and criterion reference testing. What is norm reference testing? So, a norm reference test will relate one candidate's performance to that of other candidates. It's a kind of making comparison. For example, after doing the test, you will group the students according to the results, like top 5 or top 10, or bottom 5 or bottom 10, or you can decide if you use a percentage, 100%, then you can decide that the student is better than 60% of other students who took the test. So it's for comparison, because you just measure the candidate's ability against abilities of other candidates. And what about criterion referenced? Criterion reference testing is used to measure a candidate's abilities or progress in relation to meaningful criteria, not to other students, not to other candidates, but to a set of criteria. And you use it to classify people according to whether they can perform some tasks or set of tasks satisfactorily. And this is used, the results of this type of test is used to decide whether the students pass or fail a course or a program. So this type of testing can motivate students to attain standards. So they should know the objectives of the course, they should know the standards they have to strive for, and they will learn hard to attain the standard instead of comparing themselves with other students. So these are the differences between norm-referenced and criterion-referenced testing. For excellent students, national excellent students contest, we use norm-referenced, and for other tests, we normally use criterion reference. And then we have another pair of approaches to test construction, which is objective and subjective testing. The difference between subjective and objective testing is in the methods of scoring. So objective testing requires no judgment on the part of the scorer. The answers, there's only one correct answer to each question, and the scorer don't have to think, don't have to judge whether the level or the degree of acceptability of the answer, but just look at the answer key and then note down whether it's correct, the student's answer is correct or not. But for subjective testing, the scorer judgment is needed. And there are different degrees of subjectivity in scoring. So maybe impressionistic scoring of a composition, or scoring of short answers in response to questions. So the degree of subjectivity may differ, may vary. And what about the advantages and disadvantages of these two? For objective testing, the scoring is more reliable, and we can ensure the high degree of scoring reliability And for subjective testing, of course, scoring is less reliable because different scorers may have different opinions, may have a different judgment of the student's ability through the student's test answers. Anyway, we can't use just one of the types. Normally, we often combine subjective and objective testing in order to have more accurate information about the student's ability. And then we have a computer adaptive testing. Computer adaptive testing, of course, the test is taken on the computer, and the degree of or the levels of difficulty of the questions will be adapted. Why and how is the degree of difficulty adapted? So, if a student with low level of ability have to take a full test with difficult questions, then it will waste his time, and it also waste the scorer's time to score all the tests. So the computer adaptive testing will help save a lot of time by adapting or by raising the level of difficulty or lowering the level of difficulty depending on the results of the students, on the answers of the students to the previous questions. So by analyzing the students or the candidates' performance on previous or on prior tasks, the computer will know the level or will make a prediction about the candidate's ability, and then make the test more difficult, give more difficult items or less difficult, easier items for the students or for the candidates to do. An example of adaptive testing is very obvious with oral interviews. So, of course, when examiners see that the students or the candidate is very quick and very good at answering questions, they may ask more difficult questions, and if the candidate can't answer easy questions, they will have to ask easier questions. So it's a kind of adaptive testing. And the last topic is communicative language testing. Of course, all kinds of testing we will use is to measure the candidate's ability to take part in act of communication, even for listening and reading. So in our course, we only talk about communicative language testing, test the 4 skills and even test the language elements like grammatical structures or vocabulary and even pronunciation element. So everything will be about communicative competence of the students. All right, so in this part of the lesson, I have mentioned the kinds of tests. Tests are classified according to the purposes, like measuring proficiency or measuring achievements or placing students to different groups, different classes, diagnosing, making predictions about students' learning ability, or measuring the students' strengths and weaknesses. So these are the different kinds of tests. And I've also mentioned some kinds of testing depending on the approaches to test construction, such as direct and indirect testing, discrete point versus integrative testing, non-referenced versus criterion referenced, and computer adaptive testing. So that's all about the content for our lesson today. And for practice, you will have to do this yourself. So just choose one test you are familiar with and answer the questions about the test. You analyze the test by answering the following questions. First, the purpose of the test. Decide whether it is for measuring proficiency or for placing students to different groups or for measuring achievement, etc. And the second question is to decide whether it represents direct or indirect testing or a mixture of both. And find out whether the items are discrete point or integrative or a mixture of both. Whether the items are subjective or objective, if the test is norm-referenced or criterion-referenced. And the last question, a very important one, is decide whether the test measure communicative abilities and whether you would describe it as a communicative test. And of course, you will have to give reasons for your decision, why you think it's a communicative test or why don't you think so. Okay, so this is a homework. This is homework for you, an exercise for you to do. I suggest that all of you finish 2 practices and you type down the answers and you send your answer to your monitor, and your monitor will collect all of the answers, make a folder and send it to me. Okay? Yes. So, if you have any questions related to the content of today's lesson or related to the course, feel free to send the questions to me, and I will reply as soon as possible. See you next week. Goodbye for now.